Have you ever imagined that just when you're about to reach the safe retirement milestone after nearly 3 decades of dedication, all your efforts and sacrifices could be wiped out by a single piece of paper and a few cold words? That's exactly what happened to Alicia Weston, a 61-year-old woman who had devoted almost her entire life to Harrington Tech, the most renowned manufacturing corporation in Redwood Shores, where she once firmly believed in its values and her future. One Friday, she was summoned to the office of Ethan Morales, the recently appointed executive director who'd only been there for 6 months but was already notorious for his cost optimization strategies and unpredictable decisions. The spacious office had a luxurious leather chair and lighting that reflected off a glossy wooden desk, and on the center of that desk lay a yellow folder that made Alicia increasingly uneasy. She clearly saw her name printed in bold on the label, but what unnerved her even more was the calmly indifferent gaze of Ethan, who casually asked, "So, how long have you been with Harrington Tech, Alicia?" Her reply, 29 years, seemed to encompass everything: time, dedication, youth, late-night reports, and the hope of a comfortable retirement that was just 3 days away from becoming fully vested. And yet, right at that moment, she couldn't foresee that beneath the piles of profit charts and soulless cost-cutting statements, her fate would be decided like a commodity no longer holding any value. The appearance of that folder on the desk and Ethan's smugly crossed arms signaled something terribly wrong about to unfold, causing Alicia's heart to tighten with a sense of dread. It was as though an invisible hand was drawing a dark curtain across her life, forcing her to choose between staying silent or fighting to uncover the truth she had been silently witnessing for so long. Don't take your eyes off this story, because Alicia will soon show us whether she remains silent or stands up to claim her rightful justice. Stay tuned for the next part to uncover all the secrets behind that ominous folder. Alicia Weston walked out of Ethan Morales' office with a surreal mixture of emotions tumbling through her mind, her heart beating faster than it had in decades, yet her expression remaining unsettlingly serene. The echo of Ethan's clipped voice announcing her immediate termination, in the name of so-called budget constraints, still lingered in her ears, but she refused to let any outward sign of disbelief or anger betray her inner turmoil. She merely clutched the slim, ominous envelope he had slid across his polished desk and kept her head high as she strode down the hall where the walls seemed suddenly foreign and hostile, even though she had given nearly half her life to these corridors. Harrington Tech, the place she had dedicated 29 years of perseverance, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty, had effectively decided that 3 days shy of her well-deserved pension was the perfect time to cast her aside like an outdated piece of machinery, all while offering her a thinly veiled severance package meant to buy her silence. Yet, despite the sting of this betrayal, Alicia felt an eerie calm coursing through her veins, as though every instinct within her had finally come to a crystal clear consensus that this was no random misfortune, but rather a meticulously timed act designed to deprive her of a milestone she rightfully deserved. Gabriella Chase from Human Resources stood waiting near Alicia's cubicle with an apologetic look painted across her face, though her eyes quickly darted away the moment Alicia approached, as if she were ashamed of her role in this staged formality. The entire floor was unusually quiet, its usual Friday bustle replaced by the subdued hush of people who either sensed trouble or had simply gone home early. Alicia noticed a uniformed security guard stationed near the elevator, his posture stiff, his gaze drifting between the clock on the wall and the path that led directly to her desk. With methodical precision, she began gathering her personal items: a framed photograph of her late husband, Ronald, his kind smile forever captured in happier times, a small potted fern her daughter, Bethany, had gifted her years ago, and a plaque celebrating her 25th anniversary with Harrington Tech, something she used to display proudly for all to see. Although her hands moved with care, placing each memento in a cardboard box, she could feel tension coiling inside her chest, reminding her that the intangible portions of her life, her integrity, her dedication, and her professional pride could never be packed away. Gabriella cleared her throat, voice trembling with a concern that seemed genuine yet pitifully insufficient. She whispered, "Alicia, I'm so sorry about all this. I never thought they'd do something like this to you." Alicia paused, meeting Gabriella's gaze just long enough to register the guilt lurking there, but she didn't linger on it. "It's all right," she said in a steady tone, even though deep down she was fully aware that it was far from all right. She understood too well that Harrington Tech's leadership had orchestrated this scenario for a reason. She simply didn't yet know how broad or how damning that reason would turn out to be. As she sealed the box with a strip of tape, she recognized that everything that truly mattered, her sense of self and the truth she had discovered within the company's financial corridors, was not something that could fit neatly into any box. And while she refused to let a single tear fall in front of the watchful eyes of her colleagues, a quiet anger simmered underneath her skin, fueling a resolve she had not known she possessed. When the security guard, a young man named Jorge, with an uneasy countenance, finally approached, he looked almost apologetic, as if he hated the role he had been assigned. Without a word, he gestured politely for Alicia to follow him toward the elevator. The scattered group of coworkers who were still present quickly averted their gazes, feigning sudden interest in their computer screens or in the documents strewn across their desks. Alicia did not resent them for this awkward avoidance, for she understood the crippling sense of self-preservation that ran through corporate environments when fear began to replace loyalty. Each step felt heavier than the last as she walked toward the elevator bank, her box of belongings clutched against her side like a shield. When the elevator doors closed behind her with a hushed whoosh, she felt a kind of finality wash over her, as if every floor separating her from the lobby below was erasing the lifetime she had built at Harrington Tech. Descending to the main level, she braced herself for the uncomfortable farewell in the bright foyer. She wondered fleetingly if anyone from management might step forward and wish her well or offer a sympathetic farewell, but no such courtesy materialized. Instead, Gabriella hovered behind her, wringing her hands in obvious distress, while Jorge stood with his head slightly bowed, half-heartedly murmuring, "Have a good weekend, Miss Weston." Alicia responded with a calm nod, her voice steady as she said, "Thank you," before stepping into the brisk afternoon air of Redwood Shores. The sky seemed overcast, as if foreshadowing the turbulence brewing within her future. She took a moment to inhale deeply and tried to shake off the suffocating weight of humiliation and shock, reminding herself that this was only the end of one chapter and not the sum total of her story. Her walk across the parking lot seemed longer than usual, the echo of her heels almost mocking the abrupt and callous nature of her dismissal. Settling into the driver's seat of her modest sedan, she allowed herself a fleeting moment to process the events of the day. She recalled the day she was first hired at Harrington Tech, the ambition lighting up her soul and her eagerness to climb the corporate ladder by proving her worth through painstaking effort and moral tenacity. She remembered years of meticulous data reviews, countless nights poring over compliance documents, and the firm conviction she held whenever she needed to challenge any unethical suggestion. Slowly, she realized she had never let fear or conflict deter her from doing what she believed was right. The idea that Harrington Tech could dismiss her so close to her pension vesting without the slightest remorse ignited a fire in her that burned away the numbness and left in its place a powerful determination to seek answers and possibly justice. The next thing she knew, Alicia was gripping the steering wheel with fierce resolve, recalling cryptic emails, suspicious transaction logs, and hushed conversations that once set off warning bells in her mind. She recognized that her termination on the eve of earning full retirement benefits was far too convenient to be a simple, cost-cutting measure. Her breath steadied as she reminded herself that playing victim was not in her nature, and she vowed not to let Harrington Tech bury whatever truths she had glimpsed behind the polished facade of corporate success. As she started the engine, she took one last look at the looming silhouette of the building she had served loyally for so many years, and silently promised that, come what may, she would not remain silent. Driving away from the glass and steel campus, Alicia could almost feel the shock begin to transform into fierce clarity. For she was no longer the loyal compliance officer bound by corporate protocols. She was free to question, to investigate, and to reveal every corner of Harrington Tech's dark secrets if that was what it took. In the quiet interior of her car, the box of belongings on the passenger seat seemed to glow with symbolic significance. Her entire corporate identity reduced to a photograph, a potted fern, and a plaque. while her true legacy of integrity and devotion to ethical practices was intangible, burning brightly in her heart. With a sense of calm that belied the storm she knew she was about to unleash, Alicia reminded herself that she had invested nearly 3 decades in this company, and if their betrayal ran as deep as she suspected, she would ensure that the consequences ran even deeper. As she pulled into traffic and navigated toward the quieter streets leading to her modest home, Alicia recognized that this day marked not the end of her career, but rather the beginning of a new battle loan in which she would stand firm to protect her hard-earned pension and to expose the deceptions that had lurked in the shadows for far too long. She could sense that it was time for her to become more than just a dutiful employee. She needed to be the voice of truth that Harrington Tech thought they could silence. And even though she left that building with a cardboard box instead of the retirement send-off she had dreamed of, she felt strangely liberated, as if fate had handed her the key to unlocking a treacherous secret. She refused to accept this termination as an inevitable fate, and resolved instead to pursue the answer she deserved, ultimately turning her quiet exit into the first bold step toward a reckoning that neither Ethan Morales nor anyone else at Harrington Tech could have anticipated. Alicia Weston felt her entire being tremble with a turbulent mix of disappointment and determination the moment she arrived home with that thin envelope still clutched in her hand. She had believed nothing could shock her after nearly 3 decades of navigating corporate politics, yet as she stood in her own foyer where framed family photographs adorned the walls and the scent of lavender lingered in the air, she realized she was stepping into a fresh battle she had never quite anticipated. Setting her car keys on the kitchen counter, she carefully opened the envelope Ethan Morales had thrust upon her, only to discover a severance agreement that felt more like a warning shot than any real compensation for all her years at Harrington Tech. The terms offered a meager financial cushion in exchange for her immediate resignation and, most disturbingly, a strict prohibition against raising any future claims related to the company's actions. Though she expected some semblance of insult hidden in the legal jargon, Alicia still found herself momentarily breathless at the calculated cruelty of it all. The severance deadline, bluntly stated in bold letters, was designed to pressure her into signing right away, practically daring her to ignore her better judgment. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned each page, feeling the weight of a betrayal so deeply personal that it almost overshadowed her professional instincts. Almost. Yet Alicia had not spent countless nights scrutinizing compliance reports and analyzing financial statements for nothing, and she refused to let anyone, least of all Ethan Morales, coerce her into a silence she knew would haunt her conscience forever. Carefully, she placed the severance packet on her dining table next to a bouquet of fading roses, their wilting petals, an accidental but fitting metaphor for the abrupt and withering respect Harrington Tech now showed her. She allowed herself one long, shuddering breath before walking toward a small home office she and her late husband, Ronald, had once shared. There, amid shelves stacked with photo albums and documents from more hopeful times, lay a locked metal box that held the seeds of the very evidence Alicia suspected she might need if she ever found herself cornered. When she unlocked the box, carefully lifting its lid, she saw file after file of internal memos, suspicious transaction reports, and email printouts she had quietly copied over the last few years, pieces of a puzzle she could never fully assemble until now. She had begun collecting these documents after noticing inconsistencies in product reports, unusually inflated revenue numbers, and disjointed records that hinted at more than mere bookkeeping errors. The deeper she had dug, the more she realized there were figures high in the corporate hierarchy who were either deliberately massaging those numbers or willfully ignoring glaring red flags. Every time Alicia approached her superiors for clarity, she was either patronized into silence or told she was overthinking the data, which only fueled her determination to maintain her own private archive. Now, reviewing each page under the steady glow of a desk lamp, she felt vindicated in her caution, realizing that she might hold the key to exposing unlawful schemes that had likely grown larger under Ethan's so-called cost optimization leadership. As she sorted the papers methodically into categories: fraudulent invoices, backdated certifications, questionable cost-cutting policing, as she felt an odd sense of calm seep into her bones. She knew precisely what her next move would be, because she remembered someone who, despite the passage of time, had once been an ally when it came to enforcing genuine financial integrity. Cradling her phone in one hand, Alicia glanced at an old contact, still saved under the name Connor Jenkins SEC. Connor had served as Harrington Tech's chief financial officer several years ago, before abruptly resigning and taking a new position at the Securities and Exchange Commission. During his tenure, he had shown unwavering respect for her meticulous nature, especially when it came to investigating questionable financial practices. Gently pressing the call button, Alicia drew a steadying breath, only to be greeted by his familiar voice, tinged with concern the moment he realized who was on the other end. She spoke in a quiet, measured tone, summing up the day's events and hinting at the bulk of evidence she had in her possession. Connor asked a few pointed questions, his voice growing more serious with every word, until he suggested they meet to discuss everything in person. He cautioned her not to sign anything and asked her to guard her documents like they were pure gold, a statement that brought the slightest wry smile to Alicia's lips. The conversation with Connor, though brief, felt like a lifeline, reassuring her that she was neither imagining the depths of wrongdoing at Harrington Tech nor being overly dramatic about her recent termination. After the call ended, she systematically placed the most incriminating documents into individual folders, labeling each set with careful precision, all the while recalling how the slightest numerical discrepancy had once kept her awake at night. She realized now that those lost hours of rest were about to bear fruit in a battle she had never wanted but could no longer avoid. Her severance papers lay untouched on the kitchen table, the bold deadline glowering at her under the overhead light, but Alicia knew she would not yield to those demands. Instead, she was prepared to confront Harrington Tech's injustices, armed not just with her loyalty to honest work, but with the very evidence they feared she might have. Outside, the moon rose above Redwood shores, casting pale light across the neat suburban streets and silently urging Alicia to press forward. She could sense the enormity of the fight ahead, yet, in that moment, she felt a steadiness that overcame her earlier despair, as if destiny had guided her every instinct to collect and keep these documents tucked away until the time was right. Gazing at the locked metal box and then at the severance envelope, she marveled at how quickly a company she had respected could turn on her when she posed a threat to its facade of success. This realization crystallized her determination, reminding her that her voice, her knowledge, and her righteous anger were now the most potent tools at her disposal. Although she stood alone in her home office, her heart pounded with the thrill of a mission that was both a pursuit of justice and a personal vindication. And she knew without a doubt that no severance agreement, no matter how urgently presented or how forcefully implied, would keep her silent about the truth she was prepared to unleash. Alicia Weston spent the remainder of that long evening meticulously organizing the thick stack of documents she had unearthed from her locked box, laying them out on the dining room table like pieces of a grand puzzle that held secrets only she could decode. Despite the knot of anxiety gripping her chest, she recognized that every file, every email thread, and every discrepancy report could become the key to reclaiming her future and revealing the underhanded practices lurking behind Harrington Tech's glossy corporate image. For a moment, she felt the sting of isolation sharpen, as if her pursuit of the truth meant walking a lonely road filled with uncertainty. But then she recalled one name that had repeatedly surfaced in her thoughts since the moment she discovered her termination notice: Connor Jenkins, the man who had once been Harrington Tech's chief financial officer and now served at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Long after the moon had climbed high over Redwood shores, Alicia found the courage to pick up her phone and dial the number she had been carrying like an unspoken beacon of hope. Each ring echoed the weight of her decision, and when Connor finally answered, his tone was a blend of surprise and concern. She began haltingly, her voice thick with the mix of apprehension and resolve she had been grappling with for hours, but before long, she found herself giving him a candid account of her abrupt termination and the intimidating severance proposal that practically demanded her silence. Realizing how vital it was to convey the depth of what she had uncovered, Alicia then described, in methodical detail, the suspicious financial reports and manipulated invoices she had gathered over the years, painting a vivid picture of systemic wrongdoing. Connor listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions with the same meticulous precision she recalled from their time working together, and the call stretched on for nearly 2 hours, every minute drawing her closer to a plan of action she had never truly envisioned needing. When she finally paused for breath, her hand cradling the phone tightly, she could almost sense Connor shaking his head on the other end of the line. Struggling to process the breadth of the deception Alicia believed she had documented, he confirmed that her situation was not just a matter of unfair termination timed to thwart her pension vesting, but also a glaring sign of potential securities violations that the SEC would likely take very seriously. In quiet, measured tones, he explained that she might qualify for whistleblower protections, but her safety and the integrity of the investigation depended on her refusing to sign any severance agreement that might silence her or force her to relinquish her rights. The moment those words left his mouth, Alicia felt a surge of cautious relief because someone with authority was finally listening, validating her suspicions, and urging her to stand her ground. She found reassurance in the steadiness of Connor's voice as he promised to connect her with the appropriate team at the SEC, mentioning that she could present her evidence to them as early as Monday morning if she was ready. Alicia glanced at the neatly organized piles on her table and felt the gravity of what she was about to do settle heavily on her shoulders. Part of her still grieved the swift betrayal from Harrington Tech, and another part still reeled from the fact that she was only days away from a well-deserved pension when her life took this dramatic turn. Yet, a more powerful sense of purpose now flooded through her. She vividly recalled the countless times she had raised alarms about strange discrepancies in the company's numbers, only to be told she was overreacting or missing the bigger picture. Realizing that this bigger picture might be more nefarious than she had once dared to believe, she steeled herself against any notion of backing down. Whether the path ahead led to legal battles or the unraveling of an empire, she could no longer deny her responsibility to expose the truth. Before ending the call, Connor insisted she store the files somewhere truly secure, somewhere beyond the walls of her home in case certain individuals at Harrington Tech decided to cover their tracks in less than ethical ways. She promised him she would do just that, vowing to keep the evidence under lock and key until she handed it over to those who could investigate it properly. When she finally set down her phone, the kitchen light reflecting off the documents in front of her, Alicia felt as though she had crossed an invisible threshold, from disillusioned employee to crusader for justice, a transformation she never asked for but now recognized as necessary. In that moment, she resolved to protect the truth at all costs, fully aware that the line she was about to walk could become treacherous, particularly if the powers at Harrington Tech discovered her plan. Yet no amount of fear could deter her from moving forward with the single-minded determination that had guided her through countless compliance audits and ethical dilemmas in her career. By the time the first hints of dawn crept through her window, Alicia had already removed her most damning documents from the dining table and locked them away in a newly acquired fireproof case, ready to be delivered into Connor's capable hands. She might have been exhausted, having slept mere minutes, if at all, but the adrenaline coursing through her veins fueled an unbreakable resolve. On the horizon loomed a meeting that could alter the course of her life, if not the course of Harrington Tech's future, yet she embraced the challenge without flinching. Staring at her own reflection in a small mirror above the hallway console, she whispered words of encouragement that only she could hear, reminding herself that sometimes justice demanded an unrelenting will to fight back, regardless of the personal cost. As Sunday gave way to Monday, Alicia understood that this was just the beginning of a battle unlike any she had known, and the only path forward would be to step directly into the storm armed with nothing more than the truth and the quiet confidence that she was doing what was right. Alicia Weston woke early on Saturday, sleep still eluding her after the tense conversation with Connor Jenkins, only to discover that her phone had been buzzing with missed calls and voicemail since dawn. The display revealed numbers tied to Harrington Tech's Human Resources Department, the General Counsel's office, and even an unknown cell that she could only guess belonged to Ethan Morales or someone acting at his behest. With a weary sigh, she set her coffee mug aside and tapped into the first voicemail, bracing herself for an onslaught of desperate pleas and thinly veiled threats. Sure enough, the messages were urgent, each insisting that she sign the severance agreement by the end of the weekend, lest she risk forfeiting all benefits or jeopardizing any potential goodwill. Their tone, while polite on the surface, dripped with a quiet menace, emphasizing that time was of the essence and that she would be foolish not to comply. Despite the growing tension, Alicia calmly placed her phone face down on the kitchen table, determined not to let their pressure tactics rattle her. She recalled how, during her years in compliance, she had often been the one cautioning executives that last-minute deals and frantic sign-offs were dangerous territory, practically inviting errors or unethical shortcuts. Now, finding herself on the receiving end of precisely that kind of rushed demand, she was more convinced than ever that Harrington Tech's leadership was deeply frightened by the potential fallout of her taking legal action. Rather than return their calls, she chose to spend the morning making further copies of her documents and reinforcing her plan to meet with Connor and his team at the Securities and Exchange Commission on Monday. The pale sunlight filtering through her windows did little to calm the sense of urgency swirling in her mind. Yet, she felt a renewed resolve every time she glanced at the evidence she had meticulously compiled. By noon, the voicemails and text messages escalated, with each contact at the company sounding more frantic than the last. Alicia noticed the shift in tone from cajoling to borderline accusatory, as if her refusal to respond meant she was the one being unreasonable. One message, left by Harrington Tech's legal counsel, was particularly pointed, implying that her severance package could be rescinded entirely if she failed to sign the agreement that very day. Alicia found it darkly amusing that they believed the paltry sum offered could overshadow the years of integrity she had upheld or the pension she was on the brink of losing. She replayed the message once, carefully noting each legal phrase employed, then decided it was nothing more than another tactic meant to wear down her defenses. The fact that they were so anxious only bolstered her conviction that something far more sinister lurked behind their so-called budget constraints. By mid-afternoon, she heard the rumble of an expensive sedan pulling up in front of her modest home in Redwood Shores. Peering through the lace curtains of her living room, Alicia's heart gave a quick jolt when she recognized Ethan Morales stepping out onto the curb, his posture stiff and his expression set in a mask of forced composure. His tailored suit seemed oddly out of place in her quiet neighborhood, and for a fleeting moment, she recalled the day she had first met him. He was all charm and smooth rhetoric back then, promising to usher Harrington Tech into a new era of profitability. Now, as he marched toward her door, there was nothing reassuring about his presence. Alicia quickly set aside the folder she had been indexing and waited, breath held, while the doorbell chimed through the house. She could practically feel his impatience vibrating through the door. When she did not immediately answer, he knocked again, more assertively this time, calling her name with a tone that suggested he believed she owed him some explanation. The last thing Alicia wanted was a confrontation, but something in her refused to hide. She approached the door and paused only a moment before opening it a crack, enough to see him standing there with yet another manila envelope tucked under his arm. Ethan's eyes flicked over her tense posture, clearly looking for any sign of capitulation. Without so much as a formal greeting, he launched into a practice pitch about how this was her final opportunity to sign the severance agreement, asserting that it was in everyone's best interest that she cooperate before the next business day. Alicia remained silent, letting him spew a litany of dire consequences, from the permanent loss of her severance to a supposedly diminished chance of reemployment in the industry. He tried to gloss over her near 30 years of loyalty to Harrington Tech by framing this as a simple business decision, but Alicia could see past his veneer of urgency to the deeper fear that roiled within him, fear that if she chose to expose what she knew, his entire house of cards might come crashing down. When Ethan finally paused, seeming to expect her to concede under the weight of his threats, Alicia responded in a cool, level voice that she would not be signing anything without first consulting her attorney. The flicker of surprise in Ethan's eyes was brief but unmistakable, and he attempted a last-ditch friendly approach, lowering his voice and explaining that it pained him to see her leave under such circumstances. She almost laughed at the insincerity of it all, remembering how casually he had slid that folder across his desk just a day earlier, effectively severing her from the company she had served faithfully for decades. Realizing his overtures were leading nowhere, Ethan eventually pressed the envelope into her hand, muttered something about a Monday deadline, and stalked back to his car. As he sped off, Alicia closed the door firmly, the envelope crinkling in her grip, and she headed straight to her office. She set it next to the existing severance documents, without even bothering to read its contents, then turned her attention back to the evidence that would soon reveal the depth of Harrington Tech's hypocrisy. By the end of the weekend, the intensity of the company's communications bordered on harassment, with HR staff and even some of Alicia's former colleagues bombarding her with messages urging her to be reasonable, warning her not to squander her last chance at financial support. Yet, every voicemail and text she reviewed only reminded her of the manipulation that now tainted the leadership at Harrington Tech, an organization she once revered for its commitment to innovation and progress. With each call she ignored, the air in her home felt a little clearer, and though the pit in her stomach betrayed a lingering apprehension about the battles yet to come, she clung to the knowledge that she was not the one who had betrayed a trusted relationship. At her core, she believed that doing the right thing would outlast any intimidation they could muster. On Sunday night, Alicia sat down at her desk, eyes scanning the meticulously labeled files one last time before she planned to lock them away. She realized that the coming morning would mark the true beginning of her fight, to defend not only her pension but also her professional integrity, something she valued far more deeply than any severance check. The entire house was quiet except for the faint hum of her refrigerator and the distant hum of passing cars. Still, Alicia felt anything but alone, supported by the conviction that she was no longer just fighting for herself, but for every voice that had been stifled by corporate arrogance. Whether Harrington Tech's leadership realized it or not, their flurry of threats had succeeded in only one thing: galvanizing her to stand firmer against the injustice they had hoped to bury in paperwork and intimidation. As she finally powered down her desk lamp, she allowed herself a single moment of contemplation, certain that this would be the last peaceful pause before the storm set in for real. Tomorrow, she would walk into the SEC offices with everything she had, determined to ensure that Harrington Tech, Ethan Morales, and anyone else complicit in this scheme would be held accountable for the chaos they had unleashed in her life, and in doing so, she would take one decisive step toward exposing the corrosive rot hiding beneath their polished corporate exterior. Alicia Weston arrived at the downtown offices of the Securities and Exchange Commission before sunrise on Monday, parking her car in a nearly empty garage and pausing for a brief moment to steady the wild flutter of her nerves. As she stepped out into the crisp air, she clutched a battered briefcase containing the files she believed would completely dismantle Harrington Tech's polished reputation, if only the right people would listen. She had spent the entire weekend dodging phone calls and ignoring threats, and now, finally, she was about to meet with Connor Jenkins and his investigative team, prepared to shine a stark light on the fraudulent machinations that had haunted her for years. The gleaming glass facade of the SEC building stood tall against the early morning sky, reflecting the city's silhouettes, while inside, she knew, awaited the first real chance she had at securing accountability for those who had wronged her and potentially harmed countless stakeholders. Upon entering the main lobby, Alicia felt a surge of uncertainty, but also relief when she spotted Connor waiting near the security desk, his expression one of grim determination tempered by the compassion of an old colleague who remembered her meticulous honesty. He offered a quick handshake, then guided her through the maze of corridors to a modest but quiet conference room where two other officials, an attorney named Madison Lee and a forensic accountant named Bernard Howe, were already seated. Even as introductions were made, Alicia noted how their polite smiles carried an undertone of somber focus, reminding her that everything she said in this room could spark significant legal consequences for Harrington Tech. She drew in a breath, bracing herself, then began laying out the piles of files and printed emails she had so painstakingly prepared, each folder labeled with dates, transaction codes, and subject lines that would trace a path through the heart of the company's deceit. Her voice trembled slightly at the start, but her words soon gained conviction as she recounted the very first red flag she had stumbled upon: a series of inconsistencies in shipping manifests that contradicted the official financial statements signed off by executives. She carefully explained how, over time, those anomalies had evolved into full-blown manipulations, with cost-cutting directives paving the way for false certifications and revenue tallies that made Harrington Tech's quarterly reports glow with impossible success. Connor, Madison, and Bernard listened intently, occasionally requesting clarifications and drilling down into the specifics of certain financial documents. The gravity in their eyes deepened whenever Alicia revealed that she had raised these concerns with upper management more than once, only to be brushed aside or reassigned to less sensitive duties. As the hours passed, she watched the expressions of the SEC officials shift from curiosity to concern and ultimately to a kind of grim understanding that something seriously nefarious was afoot at the highest levels of Harrington Tech. Bernard meticulously studied the spreadsheets and emails in her binder, occasionally letting out a low whistle whenever he spotted particularly damning evidence, while Madison scribbled rapid notes, pausing only to ask Alicia about specific communications that might indicate who exactly had authorized or known about these irregularities. Alicia found herself recalling conversations in which key executives had dismissed her objections as nitpicking, reminding her that Harrington Tech thrived on an innovative culture that demanded flexible thinking, even on compliance issues. Every memory felt sharper as she recounted it in this darkly lit conference room, and the more she shared, the more resolute she became in her belief that Ethan Morales and his team had orchestrated her dismissal precisely to silence her before she could bring these issues to light. After nearly 3 hours, Connor gently closed the last folder and leaned back in his chair, exhaling in a way that signaled he had taken in enough evidence to confirm her suspicions. He glanced at Madison, then at Bernard, who both nodded imperceptibly, indicating that they believed Alicia's allegations were not only credible, but also indicative of a massive breach of federal regulations. Connor turned to Alicia, choosing his words with deliberate caution, explaining that the SEC would now launch a formal investigation, gathering more data, and if warranted, preparing charges against individuals at Harrington Tech. He added that her termination just days before her pension vested strongly suggested a retaliatory act, something the SEC did not take lightly, especially in the context of her well-documented attempts to address suspected fraud. Alicia felt a knot in her stomach loosen at his earnest tone, recognizing that, at long last, she wasn't alone in this fight. Someone with authority was truly listening, and an official process was being set into motion. Yet, even as relief began to wash over her, Alicia understood the path forward would be a perilous one, for Harrington Tech's legal machine would not rest quietly while the SEC dismantled their public facade of success. Connor reminded her of the need for utmost discretion, warning that if executives learned the full extent of her cooperation, they might scramble to destroy remaining evidence. Madison, the attorney, chimed in, stressing that Alicia's rights as a whistleblower were protected by law, but the company might still attempt to undermine her credibility with claims of poor performance or personal vendettas. As they continued discussing the next steps, Alicia could feel a quiet, smoldering anger rising within her at the thought of Harrington Tech publicly discrediting her to save face, but she tamped it down, focusing instead on the satisfaction of finally exposing the deception she had painstakingly documented. When the meeting concluded, the SEC team escorted Alicia to a secure records area, where she signed official affidavits verifying the authenticity of her documents. She was also given instructions about how to contact them again without alerting Harrington Tech, ensuring her safety and the integrity of their case. Walking alongside Connor through the building's sterile corridors, Alicia couldn't help but notice the difference between this place, humming with quiet determination for genuine accountability, and Harrington Tech's polished office suites, where illusion had long masqueraded as progress. She wondered how many employees before her had noticed similar inconsistencies but chosen to remain silent out of fear or resignation. Shortly after, Alicia stepped out into the crisp midday sun, the tension in her shoulders beginning to ease as she stood on the sidewalk with her nearly empty briefcase. Though her mind spun with the possibilities of what could happen next, ranging from swift justice to protracted corporate warfare, she no longer felt lost or powerless. Each step she took away from that glass tower seemed to symbolize her departure from the secrecy that once confined her to uneasy compliance, and she allowed herself a rare moment to feel genuinely proud of her actions. She recalled how, just days earlier, she had been forced out of Harrington Tech with a flimsy severance offer and a not-so-subtle message to remain silent, yet here she was, forging ahead to expose their betrayals rather than concealing them. As she headed to her car, Alicia received a text from Connor. "Stay strong, Alicia. We're in this together." She drew a breath, steadied by the knowledge that the evidence she had shared was finally in the hands of people who could help hold Harrington Tech accountable. Driving away from the SEC building, she allowed herself a brief smile, which transformed into a resolute stare, for she understood that the hardest parts were still to come. There would be backlash, certainly. She could almost imagine Ethan Morales and his closest allies scrambling frantically for damage control the moment they realized a federal investigation was looming. But in that instant, as city streets unfolded in front of her, Alicia Weston felt certain of one unassailable truth. No matter what Harrington Tech attempted next, she would never again be that quiet compliance officer tucked away in an unremarkable corner office, too polite and too cautious to challenge the powerful. She had found a voice that demanded to be heard, and she intended to use it to reveal every last crack hidden beneath the company's gleaming public image, no matter how fiercely they fought to keep her quiet. When word reached Harrington Tech's top brass that Alicia Weston had officially gone to the Securities and Exchange Commission, an immediate and palpable sense of panic rippled through the highest echelons of the organization, sending executives into a frenzy of hushed conferences and emergency phone calls. By Tuesday morning, the corridors at Harrington Tech's sleek Redwood Shores campus buzzed with anxious energy, secretaries rushing to rearrange meetings, legal staff frantically conferring behind closed doors, and department heads whispering rumors in offices they thought were private. No one seemed quite sure what exactly Alicia had disclosed to federal investigators, but they all understood that her sudden departure just days before her pension vested, combined with the damning evidence she likely carried, threatened to crumble the well-polished image the company had cultivated for so many years. In the midst of this chaos, Patricia Meadows, the vice president of human resources, found herself tasked with damage control measures she neither expected nor felt fully prepared to handle. She convened a hastily called internal meeting that morning where she faced Ethan Morales, Harrington Tech's recently appointed executive director, and several senior managers. Ethan's normally confident demeanor had given way to a tense, clipped edge, and he was in no mood for pleasantries, cutting straight to the point by demanding an immediate review of Alicia's personnel file and all communications she'd had with upper management in the past year. His eyes were dark with impatience as he barked instructions at a shaken HR associate who scurried off to retrieve hard copies of documents Alicia had submitted prior to her departure. Meanwhile, Patricia, who had always viewed Alicia as one of the most dependable and thorough compliance officers at the company, couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that her own loyalty was being tested in an ever-escalating conflict. Unsurprisingly, by mid-afternoon, rumors of an SEC investigation had reached several board members, one of whom, Franklin Hale, demanded an urgent conference call with Ethan and the legal department. Voices rose as Franklin insisted that they needed to find out how much of Harrington Tech's core financial data might have been compromised or handed over to investigators. His anxiety was only heightened by the news that Alicia's sudden termination might be seen as retaliatory, exposing the company to significant legal repercussions. In response, Ethan emphasized that she had been let go for strictly financial reasons, although everyone in the room or on the line seemed to understand that this justification was starting to sound flimsy in the face of her compliance record and near 30-year tenure. Alarm bells were ringing louder still when the public relations team discovered that Alicia, a once obscure staff member known for her unwavering devotion to detail, had become the talk of employees from the factory floor to the C-suite. Whispers circulated that she possessed evidence of fraudulent reporting and that her name had been uttered more than once at the SEC offices earlier that very week. The PR director, a typically unflappable woman named Irene Lawson, began drafting bland statements about transitioning roles and internal process reviews, hoping to buy the executive leadership time to craft a more coherent strategy. She recognized, however, that no amount of spin would magically extinguish the suspicions swirling around Alicia's termination, and the tension in her voice was evident when she gave a subdued briefing to a handful of marketing managers, cautioning them to remain tight-lipped about any inquiries from the media. By Wednesday, the crisis spread to investor relations. As Harrington Tech's stock price started to dip in incremental but concerning drops, reflecting the broader market's unease over whispered allegations of misconduct. The board scrambled to convene yet another closed-door meeting, this time bringing in a high-powered external counsel with experience in corporate fraud investigations, who urged them to take Alicia's claims seriously. Ethan appeared increasingly cornered, never admitting outright that Alicia's termination was strategically timed, yet adamant that the company would weather the storm if they acted swiftly and definitively. Under his directive, Patricia sent out a carefully worded memo to all Harrington Tech employees, assuring them that the company was conducting an internal audit to address rumors and ensure compliance. The tepid reassurance fell flat for most staffers, particularly those who had worked alongside Alicia and admired her sense of principle. As more people recalled the meticulous nature of her work and the length of her career, questions and doubts multiplied, amplifying an undercurrent of fear that perhaps the company had something to hide. Caught in the eye of the hurricane, Patricia fielded mounting requests for clarification from supervisors across various departments who were deeply concerned about how the investigation could affect ongoing projects. Some employees discreetly called or emailed her, asking if they might be dragged into depositions or forced to testify. Each time, Patricia repeated the official stance that the company intended to fully cooperate with any regulatory inquiries, though she lacked any real details on the specifics of Alicia's allegations. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the once proud Harrington Tech leadership exuded an air of desperation, desperately hoping to contain a scandal that was quickly ballooning beyond their control. Late that afternoon, Ethan Morales retreated to his own office, momentarily free from phone calls and urgent knocks on his door. Sitting at a broad mahogany desk, polished to a high shine, he stared at the severance papers Alicia had refused to sign, running a finger along the bold black line where her signature was supposed to go. A handful of typed notes sat beside them, all referencing the evidence Alicia was suspected to have shared with the SEC. It dawned on him that once investigators started pulling the relevant files and questioning key personnel, they would uncover any discrepancies that he had either condoned or actively facilitated. His jaw tightened, and in a fit of frustration, he swept the documents off his desk, sending them fluttering across the carpet. The effort to force Alicia's silence had only made her more resolute. And now, with news of the investigation reaching Harrington Tech's investors and potentially the press, his room to maneuver was shrinking by the minute. In a last-ditch attempt to appear proactive, Ethan called for a smaller, elite crisis management group to meet in the largest executive boardroom. There, he demanded decisive action. Perhaps they could retroactively grant Alicia her pension, or claim an administrative oversight caused her termination paperwork to be processed prematurely. Yet the outside council president only shook her head, cautioning that such transparent backpedaling might look like an admission of guilt, and urging the team to focus on genuine cooperation with any government inquiry. The meeting devolved into accusations and finger-pointing, with some managers blaming Ethan for alienating a trusted veteran employee, and others insisting Alicia had been a thorn in the company's side for too long. By the time the group disbanded, the only consensus was that no one could predict how devastating this might become. The clock was ticking, and the faint odor of scandal had grown too potent to mask with empty corporate reassurances. Across the campus, in an office Alicia had once occupied, the chaos of the company's scramble was starkly evident, yet the empty desk served as a reminder of her absence. Workers passed by the closed door with sidelong glances, uncertain whether they were witnessing the downfall of a top-tier corporation or the heroic stand of a loyal employee forced to defend her own integrity. Emails and texts poured in from those who remembered her diligence, each one hinting at more details and more potential leaks. Regardless of the specifics, it had become clear that Alicia Weston would not be easily written off as a disgruntled former staffer. In fact, as the days wore on, her unwavering determination and reputation for honesty were beginning to shine a glaring spotlight on Harrington Tech's deepest secrets, leaving the company's leaders scrambling to salvage whatever reputation they could before the truth emerged in full. And as the entire organization held its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop, it seemed inevitable that they were all about to learn just how destructive and how revealing a single voice of conscience could be. Alicia Weston entered the top floor of Harrington Tech's Redwood Shores headquarters with her attorney, Catherine Riley, flanking her on one side, both of them keenly aware of the tension that pulsed behind every door they passed. They had been summoned to a special session of the company's board of directors, a meeting called under the pretense of clearing up misunderstandings, though Alicia suspected it had more to do with mounting pressures from the SEC investigation and the spiraling crisis that had rocked Harrington Tech's leadership. The reception area, usually calm and stylish, hummed with anxious energy as well-dressed executives darted between offices, whispering into cell phones with a haste that betrayed their alarm. Alicia felt her pulse quicken, but she masked her nerves with an unflinching composure, reminding herself that she was no longer an employee bound by timidity and protocol. She was here as someone fighting to preserve her hard-earned pension and, more importantly, to bring the company's buried secrets into the daylight. When a tense-faced assistant finally ushered Alicia and Catherine into the sprawling boardroom, the atmosphere shifted even further. High-backed chairs surrounded a glass table so pristine that the overhead lights created glints of reflection, reminiscent of a carefully staged set where no one ever expected a real confrontation to take place. Several board members were already seated, including Franklin Hale, who oversaw investor relations, and Irene Lawson, the PR director who had once prided herself on Harrington Tech's spotless image. Sitting at the head of the table was Ethan Morales, the architect of Alicia's dismissal, looking distinctly less confident than usual. To his left sat an outside counsel hired in haste to manage the rapidly unfolding crisis, and at the far end, an internal legal representative scrolled nervously through notes on a laptop. The tension in the room felt thick enough to slow Alicia's steps, yet she maintained a calm, measured stride and took her seat without letting her eyes waver. From the moment Catherine helped Alicia settle in, it became clear that this gathering was not the typical board update filled with polite formalities. Ethan cleared his throat and launched into a prepared statement, one that insisted the company took every concern of compliance extremely seriously and regretted any unfortunate miscommunication that had led to Alicia's departure. He offered an apology couched in corporate jargon, referencing long-standing appreciation for Ms. Weston's service and the unfortunate timing of her termination. The half-hearted sincerity fell flat, echoing in the sterile air, and Alicia could sense the other board members shifting in discomfort, as if each of them understood the precarious balance between damage control and the truth that threatened to topple their carefully guarded facade. Catherine, a sharp-eyed attorney who had already familiarized herself with Alicia's evidence, leaned forward and politely but firmly informed the room that they needed to address the matter of Alicia's pension being withheld on the very eve of its vesting date, a detail that suggested her firing had been orchestrated with malicious intent. She also made it clear that any attempt to renegotiate now would look more like an effort to muzzle her client than to right any genuine wrong. At this pointed remark, a few board members exchanged uneasy glances, while Ethan swallowed nervously, tapping a pen against the table to mask his agitation. When Patricia Meadows, Vice President of Human Resources, tried to insert a mild defense about budget constraints, Catherine abruptly reminded her that Harrington Tech had reported near-record profits only a quarter before, making that explanation ring hollow. The hush that followed was so complete that Alicia could hear the faint ticking of the modern clock affixed to the wall behind her. Franklin Hale finally broke the silence, leaning forward with an air of desperation, and announced that the board had decided to rescind Alicia's termination, pending further review. He added that they were willing to fully vest her pension immediately, and that they would provide her with an enhanced benefits package if she agreed to return as a consultant to help improve internal compliance protocols. His voice wavered between eager appeasement and forced politeness, as though he might have believed such a proposition could quell the storm that had been gathering strength ever since Alicia walked out of the building with her cardboard box. However, Alicia did not immediately respond. Instead, she studied the nervous faces around the table, recalling every memo she had sent, every meeting in which she had painstakingly detailed the anomalies lurking in their financial reports, and every moment she had been brushed aside or told her concerns were unwarranted. Catherine addressed the room again, noting that this new offer sounded less like genuine remorse and more like an elaborate tactic to mitigate the fallout from a looming federal investigation. She mentioned that her client had proof of systematic efforts to ignore, bury, or dismiss compliance reports, and that such willful negligence could be deemed more damaging in light of the fact that Alicia's termination was timed to occur just before her pension fully vested. The outside counsel, who had been silent thus far, finally raised her gaze, looking like she wanted to speak but thought better of it when she saw the cold determination etched into Alicia's features. Instead, she sat back and tapped a pen against her notes, perhaps stalling for a last-minute strategy she had not yet managed to formulate. Sensing the meeting slipping out of his control, Ethan attempted a compromise by suggesting a private settlement conference where Alicia could air her grievances without involving the SEC further. He even ventured to say that her unique perspective would be invaluable in helping Harrington Tech heal from this ordeal. At that, Alicia exhaled a quiet scoff of disbelief, her composure unbroken but her patience dwindling. She fixed her gaze on Ethan, recalling how he had barely looked her in the eye when he handed her that manila envelope finalizing her dismissal. She spoke with a level, unwavering tone, explaining that she had been sounding alarms within the company for years, only to be met with indifference or outright rejection. She reminded the board that any healing depended on true accountability and transparency, not on last-minute offers designed to silence her, just as she prepared to cooperate fully with federal investigators. Her words hit a nerve, triggering a fresh flurry of side comments among the board members, each concerned more with personal liability than corporate ethics. Patricia Meadows tried once more to assume a conciliatory tone, urging Alicia to meet with them offline, but Catherine interjected, calmly observing that every discussion from this point forward needed to be handled with utmost scrutiny given the allegations at stake. The quiet that settled after her statement felt both oppressive and oddly liberating, for in that silence, Alicia felt a long-delayed validation. She watched as the men and women who had once disregarded her now scrambled to retain some semblance of power, glancing from one to the other with carefully concealed dread. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat again, recognizing that they were out of time and out of easy answers. He managed to stammer out that the board would be taking her concerns under serious advisement, and that their internal investigation was already underway. Alicia simply nodded, saying little else, but she allowed herself a small surge of pride in the knowledge that her unwavering stance had forced them to confront the truth they had tried to dismiss. Rising from her seat, she gathered the papers Catherine had spread across the table, nodding once more to the stunned faces surrounding her, then turned on her heel. Catherine offered a curt farewell and followed Alicia out of the boardroom, leaving behind a palpable vacuum of tension as the heavy doors swung closed. When they stepped into the hallway, Alicia finally allowed herself a brief, shaky breath, quietly reassured that she had not succumbed to fear or accept an empty promise made under duress. Catherine murmured a few words of praise, reminding Alicia that the truth was now in motion, propelled by her courage and the evidence she had refused to let them sweep under the rug. Although neither woman knew how long it would take for the real consequences of this confrontation to unfold, they both recognized that a crucial line had been drawn. Harrington Tech's leadership could no longer hide behind corporate veneers and vague statements about budget constraints. Their miscalculation in underestimating Alicia Weston's resolve had led them to this moment, and now they would have to reckon with the far-reaching effects of her decision to stand tall and face them head-on, no matter how high the stakes might climb. Alicia Weston sat at her kitchen table late into the night, the glow of a single lamp illuminating the stacks of folders, emails, and financial statements she had amassed. Although she had already delivered a large portion of these materials to the SEC, she still possessed a trove of additional evidence pointing to the systematic wrongdoing that had infected Harrington Tech long before Ethan Morales arrived, suggesting he was merely the latest link in a chain of corporate deceit. Each time Alicia tried to close her eyes and rest, her mind kept drifting to stray bits of data she had uncovered, questionable loan documents, product quality reports backdated by entire months, and suspiciously inflated revenue charts that defied all logic. Even after her intense meeting with the board, she had an unsettling sense that the worst of it was only just beginning. Huddled in the quiet hum of her kitchen, she meticulously labeled new folders, cross-referencing them with employee emails and timelines to ensure her findings painted a complete picture of how deeply the rot ran. The following morning, she hesitated for a moment before placing a crucial set of documents into a plain manila envelope. These pages detailed a series of communications between senior finance managers, predating Ethan's arrival communications, that revealed discrepancies too significant to be dismissed as accounting errors and too orchestrated to be the result of mere oversight. She remembered the day she had stumbled upon these emails quite by chance, tucked away in an older server folder while she was conducting a routine compliance audit. At the time, she had flagged them, saved copies for her personal records, and reported her concerns to then CFO Victor Broderick, who had dismissed her with a curt promise to look into it. Within weeks, Alicia noticed that certain files were mysteriously disappearing from the company's intranet, prompting her to secure her own offline backups. Now, as the SEC continued its investigation, these additional proofs could form the basis of an even broader case against Harrington Tech, potentially implicating board members who had sat silent for years while the company's finances were systematically manipulated. She exhaled slowly, recognizing that turning over these documents would ignite an even more explosive chapter of this corporate scandal. But she was determined to break the cycle of secrecy once and for all. Despite the lingering ache of betrayal, she felt a wave of steeled resolve at the thought of shining a light on the lies that had cost her nearly 30 years of loyalty and, almost, her pension. That afternoon, Alicia received a phone call from Connor Jenkins at the SEC, whose voice, although steady, carried a hint of excitement. He explained that the preliminary investigation had already unearthed enough irregularities to justify deeper forensic accounting measures, and he asked if she could meet with his team again to discuss any new evidence in her possession. Although Connor did not delve into details over the phone, Alicia sensed that he was at the cusp of a breakthrough, fueled by cross-referencing her previous records with official reports forcibly released by Harrington Tech's legal department. Connor hinted that her newly uncovered documents might amplify the case exponentially, leaving the company with little room to deny or downplay the misconduct that had apparently been going on for years. Alicia agreed without hesitation, feeling the momentum of truth gather speed around her. Shortly after she ended the call, her phone buzzed again. This time, the screen displayed an unrecognizable number with a local area code, so she answered cautiously, half expecting another attempt from Harrington Tech to coerce her into signing away her rights. To her surprise, it was a junior employee from the finance department who timidly introduced herself as Raquel, explaining that she had unearthed an archived email chain referencing emergency cost adjustments and retroactive data fixes. Raquel spoke with a shaky voice, apologizing repeatedly for contacting Alicia out of the blue, but confessed that after hearing rumors about the SEC inquiry and Alicia's involvement, she felt compelled to reach out. She claimed that morale at the company was at an all-time low, with many employees worried they, too, might be scapegoated if they had inadvertently processed or approved suspicious transactions. Alicia found herself simultaneously saddened and reassured by Raquel's account, sensing that a few brave individuals inside Harrington Tech still believed in ethical standards, even if the leadership had faltered. Encouraged by the call, Alicia arranged for Raquel to speak with Connor's team as well, knowing every new piece of information fortified the case. She could practically envision Harrington Tech's board members scrambling behind closed doors, working desperately to keep the floodgates shut against an ever-expanding tide of damning evidence. Over the next 48 hours, Alicia's email inbox pinged several times with messages from other former or current employees who had discovered questionable records, each note laden with disclaimers like, "I hope I'm not overstepping," or "I'm afraid of retaliation." Alicia responded to each one, offering reassurance that whistleblower protections existed for precisely this reason, and that the truth would eventually win out, no matter how ominous the corporate defenses might appear. Amid these developments, the company's external counsel submitted a belated request to meet Alicia in good faith, hoping to quietly gather the scope of evidence she possessed before it reached the government's hands. Alicia's attorney, Catherine Riley, coolly rebuffed the overture, stating that any discussions henceforth should include SEC representatives or be conducted in a formal deposition setting, ensuring that everything was transparent and documented. Word quickly spread that Alicia was not cooperating with hush-hush negotiations, and Harrington Tech stock reacted with increasing volatility, sliding further day by day, while the press began to sniff around for a storyline about possible corporate malfeasance. Some news outlets referred to Alicia as an insider turned whistleblower, though Alicia herself felt more like a reluctant guardian of the facts, simply hoping to see justice carried out. When Raquel finally handed over her batch of recovered emails, they proved every bit as incendiary as Alicia expected. One thread highlighted a high-level directive from months prior, where multiple executives had discussed how to artificially inflate the company's earnings to meet quarterly goals. Another contained instructions to backdate certain safety certifications in the aftermath of a missed regulatory deadline. As Alicia pored over these documents, she recognized some of the names people she had known for decades implicated in actions that were blatantly unethical, if not outright illegal. The weight of it settled upon her shoulders again, stirring the same mixture of heartbreak and determination she had felt on the day she was fired. Nevertheless, she understood that every line of text, every forward or CC in the email chain, brought them one step closer to exposing the entire network of deceit. Meanwhile, within Harrington Tech's Redwood Shores headquarters, tension reached a boiling point, as multiple departments suspected that the newly emerged evidence stemmed from individuals inside the company who had refused to remain silent. Ethan Morales, under mounting pressure, called for an emergency strategy meeting with the board, urging that they clamp down on internal communications, freeze IT systems for an audit, and issue a company-wide directive discouraging employees from releasing confidential data. Rumors swirled that the board, anxious to contain the fallout, might even consider removing Ethan if it looked like his presence had accelerated the corruption or failed to keep a lid on an existing scandal. In the hallway chatter and break room gossip, Alicia's name loomed large, no longer dismissed as an overzealous compliance officer, but instead framed as a formidable adversary the company had severely underestimated. By the time Alicia prepared to meet Connor again, she felt a certain grim satisfaction in knowing that she was far from alone in unveiling Harrington Tech's secrets. With every fresh revelation, the facade that had shielded upper management for so long cracked a bit more, allowing sunlight to pierce deeper into the shadows. Although her sense of betrayal remained raw, she found renewed purpose in each new piece of evidence that surfaced, determined to see this through no matter how aggressively the corporate machine fought back. She could not forget the look of relief on Raquel's face during their covert discussion, or the faint tremor in the voices of the other employees who had come forward, trusting her to help them do the right thing. That night, after double-checking her new digital backups, Alicia locked up the stacks of paper files and stepped out onto her porch, letting the cool evening air wash over her. The stakes had grown exponentially, but so had her resolve. She was no longer just an ex-employee seeking to salvage her pension or safeguard her reputation. She now represented every voice inside Harrington Tech that had been squashed by fear or drowned out by greed. Gazing up at the stars, Alicia allowed herself a moment of somber pride, knowing that with each fresh piece of evidence, the company's days of covering up wrongdoing were numbered and that her role in unveiling those dark truths was finally shining with the clarity she had sought for so long. The official findings from the Securities and Exchange Commission landed on Harrington Tech's upper management like a thunderbolt one brisk Wednesday morning, shattering whatever fragile sense of control they still clung to. Executives who had silently prayed for a quiet resolution now watched in horror as the SEC's preliminary report spelled out, in painstaking detail, the various manipulations and backdated documents that have fueled the company's meteoric but ultimately deceptive rise. The agency cited multiple violations of federal regulations, pointing to inflated revenue statements, forged compliance records, and the relentless suppression of internal warnings, including those raised repeatedly by Alicia Weston. The result was a massive blow to Harrington Tech's credibility, with stock prices tumbling further by the hour, shareholders clamoring for answers, and employees everywhere dreading the fallout that seemed poised to reshape the entire corporate landscape. At the heart of the scandal, the SEC singled out Ethan Morales for irregular financial oversight, indicating that although he had not initiated the scheme, he had undoubtedly accelerated it by championing ruthless cost-cutting strategies that bordered on outright fraud. Worse yet, additional evidence suggested certain board members had turned a blind eye to unethical practices long before Ethan took the helm, effectively ensuring that no one in the executive circle could claim complete innocence. Messages buzzed throughout the Redwood Shores campus, with staff trying to decipher rumors of board resignations and frantic investor calls, while higher-ups in plush offices hastily scheduled emergency press briefings. The hush that fell over each department felt almost reverent, as though everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see which domino would topple next. Shortly after the SEC's findings began circulating, Alicia's phone exploded with calls and messages, not only from concerned colleagues and terrified former coworkers, but also from media outlets eager to secure an exclusive statement from the woman who had morphed from an overlooked compliance officer into the whistleblower who might very well dismantle one of Redwood Shores' most lauded corporations. Even as she busied herself sending updates to her attorney, Catherine Riley, Alicia could not repress the sense of relief that now tinged her every exhale. She had spent sleepless nights imagining this day, unsure if the truth would ever be validated in such a public way, but the document she had guarded so carefully, and the testimony of employees like Raquel had, finally forced Harrington Tech to confront the wreckage of its own misdeeds. Within hours, the company's board convened behind closed doors, desperate to figure out whether they could salvage Harrington Tech's image. Several board members who had quietly enabled fraudulent activities or at least failed to stop them realized their days were numbered. Franklin Hale, head of investor relations, tried to rally an argument about restructuring and transitioning leadership to appease regulators and shareholders alike, yet found himself stammering as the SEC's enumerated charges gave him little leeway for corporate spin. Ethan, for his part, appeared haggard and gaunt, as if the confidence he once wore like armor had been stripped away piece by piece. Patricia Meadows of Human Resources fidgeted nervously, recalling her role in orchestrating Alicia's poorly timed termination, while Irene Lawson, the longtime PR director, could only envision the tidal wave of negative headlines about to hit. Later that afternoon, Harrington Tech released a statement acknowledging the SEC's investigation and pledging full cooperation. Despite the company's carefully chosen words, the damage was undeniable. By day's end, the stock had plummeted double digits. Major investors demanded an immediate shakeup of the top brass, and talk of potential lawsuits buzzed across online forums. Employees throughout the sprawling campus huddled in small clusters, sharing updates gleaned from one another's phone screens, each group more panicked than the last. Longtime staffers said they had never seen the organization so paralyzed by uncertainty, and it became clear that the corporate giant's once pristine reputation had been permanently blemished. Meanwhile, Alicia sat in the comfort of her modest living room, fielding messages from old colleagues who were either offering apologies for doubting her or fervently hoping she could guide them on how to come forward if they too had evidence to share. She responded with measured calm, still marveling at how drastically her role had changed since the day she was asked to pack up her desk. The woman who had been escorted out of Harrington Tech under the watchful eye of a security guard was now the singular figure who held the power to reveal, with meticulous precision, the wrongdoing woven into the company's internal framework. As she passed along instructions from Connor Jenkins at the SEC, she found herself simultaneously saddened and vindicated, knowing this was a reckoning that could bring about accountability, albeit at a steep cost to the corporation. Ethan Morales' fate was all but sealed when he received a formal notice of suspension that same evening, effective immediately. Although the wording attempted to paint it as a leave of absence during an internal review, virtually everyone involved recognized it as the prelude to his dismissal, or worse. He remained holed up in his corner office for a few last hours, ignoring messages and calls while he contemplated his final gambit, though no amount of maneuvering would hide the fact that the SEC had already uncovered enough evidence to implicate him directly. Even those closest to him on the executive team quietly distanced themselves, focusing on personal survival amidst the swirling chaos. By early Thursday morning, Harrington Tech's board scrambled to issue a second statement, announcing sweeping leadership changes and a commitment to restoring trust through total transparency. The release confirmed the resignation of at least 3 board members who had approved questionable financial transactions under pressure, including one who abruptly left the country to spend time with family, prompting wry speculation that he intended to dodge subpoenas. The company's stock continued its freefall, and talk of layoffs or asset sell-offs began circulating as ways to stabilize finances. Yet, for many observers, the biggest question centered on the looming legal repercussions and whether indictments might land at the feet of individuals who had orchestrated or concealed the fraud. In the midst of this corporate upheaval, Alicia received a call from Catherine, who reported that the SEC now viewed Alicia not just as a whistleblower but as the pivotal witness in any forthcoming legal proceedings. Her meticulous records, combined with the wave of supporting testimony from courageous insiders like Raquel, gave the case an unshakable foundation. Catherine relayed that federal prosecutors had started reviewing the SEC findings, signaling that criminal charges were a distinct possibility for those who had knowingly perpetrated or greenlit fraud. For a moment, Alicia felt a knot form in her stomach, recalling all the times she had pleaded for someone in leadership to take her warning seriously, only to be dismissed or threatened. Now the sword of accountability hung over Harrington Tech, and she hoped that genuine reform, not merely punishment, would emerge from the company's ruin. Word spread quickly about the investigators' next steps, with employees bracing for deeper scrutiny into individual departments and a possible parade of depositions. Offices that once resounded with pride at record profits were now consumed by distrust, as colleagues wondered who had played a hand in the deceit. The Redwood Shores campus, once a glittering symbol of success, became a site of apprehension, uncertainty, and whispered admissions. No matter what Harrington Tech's PR statements claimed, the sense of betrayal and impending judgment was impossible to deny. And for the employees who had worked honestly, never suspecting the extent of the underhanded tactics, a bitter mix of anger and betrayal rippled through their everyday tasks. Through it all, Alicia carried herself with an unshakable blend of resilience and resolve, neither reveling in the company's downfall nor apologizing for the role she had played in triggering it. She was, at last, no longer a silent observer trapped within the confines of a corporate machine, but a catalyst for long overdue truth. The grim satisfaction of knowing her perseverance had exposed a web of lies was tempered by the realization that others had also suffered under the weight of Harrington Tech's deception, yet that knowledge only reinforced her belief that the path she had chosen was right. This moment, with the SEC investigating and the public watching, represented the first glimmer of authentic accountability, a stepping stone toward a reckoning that would reshape the company's legacy for good, no matter how many executives and board members tried to deny it. Alicia Weston stood on the steps of the Redwood Shores Federal Courthouse beneath a sky that seemed just a bit brighter than it had in weeks, watching as several former Harrington Tech executives filed out in subdued silence. Their shoulders sagged, their expressions hollowed by the weight of guilty pleas and looming sentencing hearings, a stark contrast to the confident swagger they once displayed in polished boardrooms. She felt no triumph in their downfall, only a guarded sense of resolution, that justice, albeit delayed, might finally be served. Memories of her own abrupt dismissal flooded her thoughts, recalling how Ethan Morales had scarcely bothered to glance her way while sliding that severance envelope across the desk, so certain she would vanish quietly without a fight. Yet here they all were, drawn to this conclusive moment by the many documents and testimonies she had so meticulously safeguarded and shared. Stepping aside, Alicia let the clusters of journalists and curious onlookers part around her, their rapid-fire questions mixing with the shuffle of feet and hum of idling cars. She reminded herself that she was no longer the compliance officer whose warnings were consistently brushed aside. She was a free agent, someone who had refused to be cast aside 3 days shy of her rightful pension. The swirl of images in her mind, her phone calls with the SEC's Connor Jenkins, her tense meetings with Harrington Tech's board, the wave of new whistleblowers emboldened by her stance confirmed how drastically her life had changed since she first dared to challenge the company that once seemed untouchable. Later that same afternoon, she found herself at a coffee shop not far from the courthouse, sipping tea across from Catherine Riley, her attorney and unwavering ally through every step of this tumultuous journey. Catherine held out a packet of papers that spelled out, in official language, the terms of Alicia's reinstated pension, retroactive to the date it should have vested. Additionally, there was an offer of compensation attempt by Harrington Tech's new leadership to mitigate some of the damage wrought by its former board. Alicia studied the documents in silence, recalling each night she had stayed late at the office or missed time with her daughter in pursuit of what she once believed was a company worthy of her devotion. She remembered the weight of her cardboard box on that final day, brimming with personal items that symbolized decades of service. Accepting this financial redemption felt at once validating and profoundly bittersweet, but she knew it could never fully erase the betrayal she had endured. Catherine, sensing her unease, gently reminded her that all the time and sacrifices she had poured into Harrington Tech deserved fair acknowledgement. and that it was not merely a payday but a statement of accountability. Alicia exhaled slowly, signing the forms with a measured calm that reflected not relief but conviction, seeing in Catherine's eyes a shared understanding that this moment represented a necessary, if imperfect, restitution. In the corner of her mind, she contemplated the company's half-hearted offer of a consulting position, which dangled the potential for her to shape a new compliance framework. Yet, the more she thought about returning, the more she felt that her mission now lay beyond Harrington Tech's walls, where she could contribute to a broader culture of corporate ethics without the ever-present shadow of her old battles. In the weeks that followed, Alicia did indeed channel her knowledge of compliance and diligence elsewhere, collaborating with regulatory agencies on refining whistleblower protocols and giving talks at industry conferences about the perils of unchecked ambition. The media, initially enthralled by the spectacle of Harrington Tech's collapse, began shining a spotlight on her as a symbol of moral fortitude, inviting her to speak on news segments and podcasts aimed at exposing systemic corporate malfeasance. Despite the sudden wave of public attention, she preferred to keep her personal life private, focusing on her daughter Bethany and her grandchildren, who had recently moved closer to be nearer in this time of unexpected change. One crisp Saturday morning, Alicia visited a local financial management class at Redwood Community College, sharing a presentation on responsible business practices and recounting her own experiences. She watched the eager eyes of students who were determined to enter the corporate world with integrity intact, and she sensed their curiosity blossom into a fierce admiration for her courage. In that moment, she realized the importance of planting these seeds early, ensuring that a new generation would learn from the mistakes of Harrington Tech's downfall. Walking out of the auditorium with a stack of follow-up questions tucked under her arm, she felt hope stirring in her chest, recognizing that her story could deter other corporations from venturing down the same treacherous path. Meanwhile, Harrington Tech struggled to regain stability, forced to operate under stringent oversight as part of a settlement brokered by regulators. A new interim CEO took the helm, pledging transparency in all financial filings, while the board underwent a full sweep of resignations and appointments. The Redwood Shores campus, once a flashy emblem of profit and progress, was now subdued, with employees wary but also clinging to the possibility of genuine reform. Emails still reached Alicia from old colleagues who remained, describing a mixture of relief that corrupt figures were finally gone and sadness at what might have been had ethics not been cast aside for fleeting quarterly gains. On a personal level, Alicia began channeling part of her settlement into establishing a small scholarship fund dedicated to students pursuing business, ethics, and corporate compliance, naming it in honor of her late husband, Ronald, who had always encouraged her methodical passion for doing the right thing, no matter how unpopular it might be. Invigorated by the joy of helping others find their moral footing, she considered it an investment in the future, one rooted in the lessons she had learned at such a steep personal cost. One evening, after a long day of meetings with educators and professional organizations, Alicia settled into the warmth of her living room, glancing at the plaque she had once displayed in her old office, which commemorated her 25th year at Harrington Tech. This time, she felt no regret, only a quiet acceptance that while her trajectory might have ended differently than she had once anticipated, she had found a purpose more profound than a single pension or a corner office could offer. Stretching her legs and looking around at the family photographs on her mantle, she understood that integrity had guided her here, allowing her to reclaim not only her livelihood but her sense of self. Standing at the threshold of a new life path, Alicia Weston realized that sometimes losing what you thought was everything sets you on the exact path you were meant to travel. She had faced betrayal and uncovered lies that ran deeper than she ever imagined, yet she had emerged with a renewed sense of moral clarity. It was not revenge she savored, but the simple satisfaction of witnessing justice done, and the knowledge that her courage might protect others from the same fate. While Harrington Tech still had a difficult road to redemption, she felt no obligation to remain entangled in its trials. Instead, she chose to walk forward fortified by the knowledge that speaking truth to power could make all the difference in a world too often swayed by profits over principles. And now, as we reach the close of Alicia's story, we invite you to reflect on how a single act of courage can reshape not only one person's life, but also an entire corporate landscape. If you've been inspired by Alicia's journey, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you'll be the first to know when new stories of resilience and justice go live. Because in a world filled with swift decisions and silent compromises, the voice that refuses to be silenced can spark the most profound change.